Hi everybody. I received some messages that there's a lot of people who enjoyed the interviews I did with Lone Star Drift, and people sent me questions by direct message on Instagram or one of the things that a lot of people ask me is about what's like the perfect car to build. So what would your dream build be and why? And that is if you do make a decision, because what I see a lot is that people in retrospect are talking about a certain car and about how good it is or some things that are not so good about it, but that's when they already have the car. So it's a little bit of a misunderstanding that people will actually sit down and write down like, all right, maybe I'll use an S Chassis and write down the pros and cons of an S Chassis. Maybe I'll use a 350Z and write down the pros and cons of a 350Z versus an E92. Right now you see that happening with the Pro 2 guys. We see it at the Drift Car Builders Facebook page, where there's a lot of this type of discussions going on, but that's really a new thing. And most of the cars that I've built for clients and most of the cars that I know from guys that I meet in competition, they're actually not built that way. So they're actually guys that maybe had that car as a road car, or maybe worked at a Nissan or a Toyota or a BMW dealership, and for some reason ended up having that chassis or having a love for that certain chassis, and that's actually perfectly fine. And that's also not a bad thing for me, because in motorsports, the traditional racing motorsports, it's not that way. That's where there's a lot more professionalism going on, there's a lot more sponsoring going on, and there's a lot more people that are contemplating, why should I use this chassis versus that chassis? And in drifting it doesn't really happen that way. Like obviously there's a lot of S chassis, because that's where it all started from. Like that's the car that the majority of the people that know a little bit about drifting, so let's say the Top Gear people, as I always like to call them, so they're more into maybe supercars or luxury cars or whatever, and they know some stuff, they know it exists, they know some stuff about drifting, and they will always immediately think about an S chassis, like that's the car for drifting. And obviously it's a fantastic platform for drifting, but as I also explained in Aaron's interview, in my part of the world they're a little bit harder to get. There's a few things that you could like about them. One of the things obviously is that it's built like a sports car, so it's pretty light, it looks very sporty, like they look fantastic with the right body kit on it, like Brandon Wicknick's car on Drift Week 2. I love that car. It may not be a very big budget build or something, but the way that thing looks, like parked or on the track or with the stance that it's got, I love that. I love that very much. I think that's a very, very cool looking car. So I love those things, absolutely do. But they do have a rear mounted steering rack, and that's one of the things that I'm not totally crazy about. For drifting I prefer a front mounted steering rack, because that way there's more control, especially if you move to the insane lock angles that are becoming the norm in drifting competitions such as DMAC and FD. Also, subsequently, what you get if you run a front mounted steering rack is that the control arms are facing rearwards, like the BMW control arms attached to the chassis, almost at the level of your throttle pedal. So it sits so they sweep backwards towards the rear axle. That means that the whole front end of the car can be cut off because it's not really structural. On the S chassis they extend forward, so it's basically the opposite of a BMW 3 Series setup, where the steering rack is in the back and the arms face forward, which also means that on the S chassis the whole first front of the car, like right behind the front bumper, is critical for the alignment of the car. And if you would have a crash or something like that, you could damage the chassis in ways that's very difficult to fix. So that will be one of the things that is a consideration for me. Other people may not care, or they may say like, hey, but I like the S chassis so much better than the 3 Series, I don't mind that the rack position is a little less ideal, and I am more concerned with maybe with the looks or with the availability of cool wheels. But I don't have the impression that there's a lot of people that would technically go from Z Chassis to a BMW and back just only for technical grounds. Like that happens only in the absolute, like the 5 to 10% of drifting, which what I would consider pro drifting. So they may not be competing in FD, but they do have a crew chief, or they are their own crew chief, and they are thinking about these kinds of things. And for me, that's normal because it's my job to build drift cars. It's my job to build race cars. So it's kind of it's always in my mind. So if I see a car, so let's say BMW introduces a new car, completely new platform, that's the first things that I look at. So BMW in this country sometimes invites me when they have a brand new model, like an M2 or an M3 or something like that. For some bizarre reason, they invite me to the introduction of that car. And they ask me my opinion, and obviously it's all shiny and it's got even bigger wheels than the one before, and it's got even more power and more exhausts and whatever, more Bluetooth. But I always ask them, like, is it possible for me to see it on the lift? You know, I want to see it on the lift. I want to see how it's made. And usually they decline because I've got only one or two of them for the opening or whatever. But from time to time I did actually manage to put it on a lift for me. And that's the first stuff that I look at, like what's the setup of the knuckles, what kind of caster camber, all those things. Like I try to determine the scrub angle of the car, and those things for me speak volumes for if I'm gonna like the car. The thought process in my mind when somebody asks me like which car should I build or which car should I buy or what do you advise, and I have the feeling that they will actually listen to it, because there's a lot of people that ask questions just to get confirmation about something that they've already decided on or something that they've already done. And you typically get people that have, for instance, bought a let's say that they bought a Lexus IS 300 to build a drift car out of, and they ask me my opinion about the Lexus IS 300, and I tell them the things that I like and I tell them the things I don't like, and the things that I don't like they immediately start to almost defend it, and then I already know, like, all right, you know, we're friends, we're bros, and I like to talk to you, but your mind is made up. You know, you're not asking me what you should buy. You already have your heart set on that IS 300, which is great, and you're just looking for some confirmation about that stuff. And that, to me, that's a little bit, I mean, that's funny, but I much prefer it when people still have like a blank mind and they really want to know, and they go off the advice, maybe not my advice, but maybe other people's advice that they hold in high regard. So the first thing that I look at is, what are you going to do with the car? Where is it going to be competing, obviously? And why that's important is because that there are tire stipulations or tire limitations to certain classes. In Europe, there's been a rule for a long time that you could only run a 265. And in America, there's obviously the rule with the weight versus the tire. So if you want to run the 295 tire, you need to be over whatever 3,000 pound or something like that. So those are elements in the equation that are very, very important. And there's a lot of bandwidth in there. What you see right now in Formula Drift is that the guys that run the heavier car in order to run the bigger tire, that they seem to be more successful. Obviously the Mustangs, Chelsea, Vaughn, who just became the champ, Audi, James Dean, Piotr, they ran like the big tire and the heavy car. So that seems to work in a certain way. While in motorsports, what always worked very well for me is to run a lighter, smaller car with a smaller engine. But for drifting, it seems that especially in FD, the best way to do it is to run that absolute wide tire and to just accept the fact that you need to make that car a lot more heavy than you may want it to be. And obviously the American FD cars are, I would say, almost between 400 and 500 pounds heavier than the European pro cars, because we don't have the tire rule. And you can see guys going to the 285 and the 295 tire in Europe. So that's one thing that's very important, and that actually also applies to racing. Find out which tire, which wheel, which rim you want to run. So you may be driving a certain car right now and you want to step up to a higher level or to the next class, and you still have a lot of spares. You may still want to run the same gearbox, you may still want to run the same wheels because you've got like 30 of them. You could even maybe transfer the brake setup or something like that from your old car, or turn the old car into more of a missile kind of car and transfer all the good bits to the new car. So that's one thing, like which wheel you're going to run, that determines a lot on the car. Because it determines like your rear end ratio, it determines which body kit you want to run. Guys that have, you know, loved a certain body kit and worked hard to afford it, and I love that stuff, to be honest. If I see guys with the really special kits from Japan, like there's this fantastic kit for an FD RX-7, I think it's called RA Mamiya or something like that. Excuse me, I'm not real big on the Mazda knowledge, but like that kit looks so amazingly good. Like I can totally understand that people get that kit first and then build it. Everything on my car is either European or American made, and that's important to me. So for me, that's also another consideration, like who are you supporting with the build that you're doing. Like there's a lot of companies that we retail, that I retail not only for business reasons, but also because I like that company, and because I believe in the way they work, and because I believe that they deserve more business, and because I think that drivers are going to be very well off running those components. So that's a couple thoughts on which chassis you should run, and I have to say that I appreciate almost every drifting chassis that there is. There's not one chassis that I would say like that's so stupid to run that chassis, I would never run that chassis. Like you could say that a rotary engine is very problematic to run, or that you can never get like reliable good power from it. That may be one drawback of that engine, but it also draws a lot of attention. So everybody's always talking about rotaries, and it's always super interesting, and guys that build them always get a lot of followers, they get a lot of likes. So it may be an engine that may fail a little bit more often than a JZ or than a V8, but it also has certain other advantages. So if you think along them lines, yeah, there's something to say for everything. But there's the few key things that I look at, and one of them is, like I said, the wheel size, and the other one is like how well does it accommodate the engine that I want to use. So I work a lot with BMW. BMW has a lot of fantastic V8s, like the S62, which is the 5-liter that came in the E39 M5, which I think is a fantastic engine. I love that engine. It's very reliable. It may be a little short on power for current pro drift levels, but still it's a very good power plant for drifting for 90% of the people out there. However, it has the sump on the front, and it's very difficult to change that in a correct way, in my opinion. So to run that engine in an E46 or an E36, you would require a dry sump system, because an E36, E46 requires a sump in the back. So that would be a consideration to use an S chassis, because you could fit that engine in there quite easily. So those are a couple of my thoughts. Like it already turned out to be like, I don't know, 15-minute video or something. So this is some of my thoughts on how I choose a chassis. There's obviously a lot more to it. And don't get me wrong, like I totally love that in drifting that it's all not so logical, and that there's a lot of people that are making choices that are not very logical, because that makes drifting so absolutely fantastic. And it's also what kind of makes the racing world a little bit more boring, because there's so much more money involved, there's also so much more logic involved. And the fantastic thing about drifting is that we all do stuff that's totally not logic. And that's actually the spice of life to me, and that's what makes drifting continue to be so extremely interesting to me. I hope you guys liked it and you didn't fall asleep. I always feel bad doing these huge interviews where I'm just talking, but the ones we did with Lone Star Drift got so many, got like 200-300 very positive replies. So I thought maybe you guys would like to hear some more about that. So I'll keep doing these things. You'll be able to see in the thumbnail on YouTube that it's going to be a talking video. So if you like that stuff, you know what you're going to get. And if you don't like it, just stay tuned, because we're going to be doing a lot of videos with a lot more action, and there's a lot of videos coming up explaining the build and showing the builds of certain cars. So just trying to do stuff to please everybody a little bit. So I wish you guys a fantastic day, and please comment if you have any questions or remarks or anything. So, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you very much.